All right, picking up where we left off in the previous video with folliculogenesis. So the ovarian follicle is the ovum or egg cell and some supporting cells that surround it. So follicles will grow and develop, resulting in that ovulation during each cycle after puberty and before menopause. So there's a process called atresia. This is the death of a follicle. This can occur at any point during the process, at any point during the month. So not all follicles will fully develop. There are millions of what are called primordial follicles that are present at birth, and they are going to have one layer of thin granulosa cells that surround that oocyte. And then at puberty, a few of these primordial follicles will become primary follicles. So this granulosa cell layer will thicken with each passing cycle. And then these primary follicles will become secondary follicles as the granulosa cells divide with something called theca cells that are making up this outer layer of cells. These theca and granulosa cells are going to make estrogens. So estrogen levels increase as the follicles get bigger, and then they will decrease as the follicle breaks down. Secondary follicles then become tertiary follicles, and then we have some fluid that collects inside of the follicle, which will help with this zona pellucida, which surrounds the oocyte. This is a protective layer around the egg cell. Each cycle, so each ovarian cycle, only one tertiary follicle generally is going to develop to ovulation. Any other follicles, any of these secondary or tertiary follicles, will undergo that death process. And then during ovulation, that secondary oocyte is released, but the granulosa and theca cells stay in the ovary. So this is the image out of the textbook. I do have another image to kind of show this in a different way, but here we have our primordial follicle. So this is present at birth. So we have the oocyte inside of it, granulosa cells surrounding it. Here's our primary follicle. So those granulosa cells have grown in number, so they've divided, they've made more copies of themselves. That layer's gotten a lot thicker. And so in between that and the actual oocyte or egg cell is the zona pellucida. Then, as we keep developing into that secondary follicle, those granulosa cells will further increase in number, and so we get this larger ring around that egg cell. The theca cells are outside of the granulosa cells, so represented more in purple here. And then we can get this tertiary follicle. And the oocyte is going to be inside, theca cells out here, granulosa cells, nice thick layer of the granulosa cells. And this is what would be ovulated, is this egg cell from this tertiary follicle, leaving behind the theca cells and the granulosa cells after that ovulation process. So this follicle, part of it will kind of burst apart, which allows the egg to leave that follicle. And then the egg will transition into the uterine tube to move into the uterus, whereas these granulosa cells and theca cells stay in the ovary, forming the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum is a really important structure, especially in cases of pregnancy. For maintaining that pregnancy, it's going to help produce some progesterone, which will kind of signal to the uterus to not break down the lining yet. And then this image down here is an actual micrograph. So this is a cross-section of a real ovary with these different cells. So this is a secondary follicle. So real life version of this image here with our granulosa cells around here. Here's the zona pellucida. If we follow this line right here, we can actually see that line. Here's the nucleus of that egg cell, and then this is the actual oocyte itself. So that's what that looks like in real life, not artificially colored. Here's another way of kind of looking at this. So this is the entire ovary as a whole. So here's our primary follicle right there. Those cells, again, will grow. So here's our growing follicles with the different cells, the granulosa cells and theca cells. We get into this stage with the mature vesicular follicle. So this is going to be the either secondary or tertiary follicle, kind of in this phase right here. And then here's our egg right there. Then we ovulate, so releasing that egg cell through those different theca and granulosa cells. So that follicle ruptures and then kind of shrinks down into that corpus luteum structure, which will degrade over time whether or not pregnancy happens. So this doesn't get maintained forever, but corpus luteum is present for about 2-ish weeks, depending on the overall length of the ovarian cycle. But most of the ovary is full of these primary follicles that are present from birth. With that, let's get into some of the hormonal control of the ovarian cycle. And I am specifying ovarian for a reason. There is also the uterine or menstrual cycle, which has to do with the uterus specifically and the changes that happen in the uterus, whereas the ovarian cycle refers specifically to changes in the ovary during roughly the same period of time. So hormonal control of the ovarian cycle is very similar to hormonal control of the testes, so spermatogenesis and stuff like that, because we are looking at the gonads for both systems here, so that's why the hormonal control is going to be really, really similar. So again, hypothalamus will secrete that gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which signals to the anterior pituitary gland to make luteinizing hormone, which will trigger the ovaries to make estrogens and progesterone, and then follicle stimulating hormone will trigger those follicles to develop. So that's where the name came from initially, even though both sexes will produce these hormones, is follicle stimulating. So again, you can refer back to the endocrine system chapter for some additional details here, but very similar process for both testes and ovaries. The ovarian cycle does get split into 2 distinct phases: the follicular phase and the luteal phase. So the follicular phase is the first half of the cycle. This is where those follicles are actively growing. Oogenesis is occurring, so we're going through those different stages of meiosis 1 and meiosis 2. We've got that folliculogenesis, so again, increased number of theca cells and granulosa cells. We are producing estrogens actively, and this phase ends at ovulation, which also signals the start of the luteal phase, which is that second half of the cycle. So this is when the granulosa and theca cells become the corpus luteum. These will continue producing both estrogen and progesterones to support early stage pregnancy. So if pregnancy does not occur, then that corpus luteum actually becomes the corpus albicans, which does not make hormones, and then ultimately fully breaks down. So here's kind of some graphics. So hypothalamus signals that gonadotropin releasing hormone to the anterior pituitary, which sends LH and FSH to the ovaries to stimulate the egg and follicle to develop and keep moving. Some of those estrogens will also go to the uterus. We'll talk more about that when we cover the uterine cycle. After ovulation, we are going to actually release that egg, and then we are going to ultimately have, again, that follicle. What's left behind transitions into the corpus luteum in that luteal phase. Right here, which will secrete progesterone. Again, that's important for early stage pregnancy. But you can also see here in this graphic really nicely that negative feedback loop. So as those estrogen and progesterone levels increase, they will negatively signal to the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland that we don't need as much of that gonadotropin releasing hormone or the luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. So that's how we have that negative feedback loop here again. All right. Let's get into the uterine tubes. So these are also referred to as the fallopian tubes or oviducts. They have 4 sections. We're not going to focus on all of these in lab material this week, only a couple of them. So the isthmus is what is connected directly to the uterus. The ampulla is where fertilization should be taking place. The 2 structures we do cover in lab are the infundibulum. This is a wider section close to the ovary that then transitions into the fimbria or fimbriae. These are finger-like projections which help encourage that ovulated egg to enter the uterine tubes, because the uterine tubes are not fused to the ovaries. There is a space in between them. Inside of the uterine tubes, we have a mucosa lining that has more cilia, which will help move the egg towards the uterus. And there are also smooth muscles in the walls of these tubes to further help and direct that ovum into and through the tube to the uterus. So here's our uterus and some nearby organs. So here's the uterus right here, roughly pear-shaped. Ovaries on either side of it. Here's the uterine tubes. This would be the infundibulum region right here. These are going to be the fimbriae, or those finger-like projections. The ovarian artery and vein are also going to be kind of connected into those tubes, as well as some of the ligaments. We've got more blood vessels going to the actual uterus itself. So top of the uterus again is the fundus, then we've got body of the uterus. Cervix is this lower region right before it transitions into the vaginal canal. So the uterus itself is a muscular organ, roughly about the size of the fist when it is not growing a fetus or embryo. So its job is to support the growth of that embryo or fetus in cases of pregnancy. Again, we've got the fundus, body, and cervix. It has 3 layers to the wall. The most internal, so inside, is the endometrium. This is going to build up in preparation for ovulation and implantation of a fertilized egg, and will be shed with the menses if pregnancy does not occur. The next layer, middle layer, is the myometrium. This is a very thick layer of smooth muscle tissue. So this is going to contract during labor to help push the baby out. This is also contracting during period cramps, triggered by certain hormones that are being produced and stuff like that. And then the perimetrium is the serous membrane covering the outside, so this will kind of be fused in with that broad ligament, helping to anchor everything in place. So the endometrium has 2 layers, stratum basalis and stratum functionalis. So the stratum basalis is right next to that smooth muscle, the myometrium. The stratum functionalis is more internal, so this is the layer that is thickening and growing with that blood in response to higher estrogen levels. If pregnancy occurs, it will support the fertilized egg or zygote to implant in this layer in response to those estrogen and progesterone levels from the corpus luteum. And then if pregnancy does not occur, this layer gets shed with the menses during the period in response to decreasing hormone levels as that corpus luteum becomes the corpus albicans and further degrades. And we are going to continue in the next video talking about the menstrual cycle or uterine cycle.